Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We talk with researchers and other interesting people to understand how to find our groove in daily life.
And today we are excited to share our conversation with Elizabeth Weingarten, author of How to Fall in Love with Questions.
Yeah, Elizabeth's book is a fascinating blend of memoir, behavioral science, and philosophy, drawing inspiration from the Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke and his famous advice to love the questions themselves.
Yeah, Tim, you love that part. I know that.
Oh,
we talked about it before even going in. So what makes this book unique is that instead of offering a quick 3-step process to deal with uncertainty, Elizabeth invites us to develop a deeper relationship with the questions that shape our lives.
Yeah. In our conversation, we explore how our brains are wired to crave certainty and use as little energy as possible, making uncertainty feel profoundly uncomfortable for us.
Yeah, and Elizabeth explains how this biological tendency makes us vulnerable to what she calls ultra-processed information. Those quick, easy answers served up by social media, influencers, and I don't know today, Tim, you think AI might be serving up some of those ultra-processed question answers? Yeah, there you go.
Maybe. Yeah. Okay. So we also discuss her concept of questions practice, similar to meditation or yoga, that helps us move from feeling stuck in uncertainty to finding clarity, which is different from finding answers.
I'm doing my question yoga. I'm sorry. All right. And perhaps most insightfully, Elizabeth shares how learning to love our questions isn't just about dealing with the external uncertainty that we all face, but about deepening our relationship with ourselves. And I thought that was a really cool piece of this.
Yeah. Elizabeth's background is equally fascinating. She's part journalist, part behavioral scientist, and she has served on the board of Behavioral Scientist magazine. By the way, if you are not subscribing to Behavioral Science magazine, check it out in the link in the notes because it's fantastic. Her work encourages us to use questions as an internal GPS to better understand who we are. Sounds like finding your groove.
That does. A little bit like finding your groove there. And if you've ever felt uncomfortable with uncertainty or found yourself anxiously searching for answers to life's bigger questions, I don't know. Do we ever do that, Tim? I don't know if we ever do that. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, then this conversation will give you new tools to approach those feelings and to maybe answer them. Maybe at least I get the right questions, right?
Getting the right questions is important. One last thing we want to call attention to is that Behavioral Grooves, drum roll please, was named one of the top behavioral science podcasts by FeedSpot.
Yes, we are number 2 on the list. Number 2. We're number 2. We're number 2. And we're very pleased to be in such fine company. Also, if you are not using FeedSpot to curate your podcast, you should check it out. Start now. They do a great work on curating top lists of podcasts that will save you time and reduce your uncertainty. Like how we got that little uncertainty thing.
Good play.
Yeah. We've got a link in the notes again to help you navigate there easily with certainty.
So right now, we encourage you to sit back and relax with a fine pour of Loving the Question wine, perhaps while listening to Steely Dan or Chappell Roan, which are 2 of Elizabeth's Desert Island music picks, by the way. Okay, as we welcome Elizabeth Weingarten to Behavioral Grooves. Elizabeth Weingarten, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It is so great to have you here. We have such great backgrounds. Like, we need to be doing this over a cocktail, I feel like, in some cool spot in Mill Valley. But that's just my dream. Okay, let's start with a speed round. Let's actually just find out, and I'm already getting produced. I'm being overproduced already. Coffee or tea?
Definitely coffee. And I will tell you, I had a long period of time recently where I could not drink coffee. I was pregnant, and it was this weird aversion that I had.
Oh,
And I just couldn't even smell coffee. It made me want to puke. And it was one of the saddest periods of my life because I love coffee. And I was like, oh, what do I do? And so now I'm kind of like back in coffee mode since I had my son. And it feels so good to be back. So.
oh my gosh. I've never heard that the lack of coffee making a sad part of our life, but yeah, I can see it.
One of the best answers to that question ever.
Yeah. Yes. And I am not overproducing you, Tim. I am sorry.
Totally, 100%.
I make a suggestion here, and you can disregard it. You always disregard it in the past. So I don't know why all of a sudden you're like making this. All right, second feed around question. Sorry, Elizabeth, we have our little tit tat that we have to go back forth. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird.
Early bird.
Although, you know what, frankly, I more of an early bird, but kind of like neither. Because I just like to sleep. And especially, and I'll say another thing that will tell you again, like where I'm at in my life, but my son is 7 months old, and he just started sleeping through the night, kind of mostly. And so what I've realized is my ideal schedule is like bed by 10 and up, it's 7 or 8, which maybe is early for some people. But I really like to just get sleep on both ends. So that's ideal.
So you're more of just a sleep person as opposed to early bird or night owl. It doesn't matter. Hey, just give me 10 hours and I'm good. There you go.
Exactly. Okay. But, more so recently, it's been waking up pretty early and, trying to get to bed as early as I can. But late at night, I'm definitely, I'm not as sharp and I don't have enough, so I think probably more of an early bird.
Yeah.
It's interesting having kids. You realize the importance of sleep. Because, you could always, like before, at least for me, it was like, yeah, you could go pull a late night or do something in different pieces. But, you would make up for it at some point later on in that week. With a child that young, that doesn't happen. It's like, no, there is no recovery weekend that I get to sleep in. And,
absolutely. Yeah. No. And that feeling of like, you spend a long day at work and you're like, boy, I'm really tired now. Good thing I get to relax tonight. It's like, well, that doesn't happen, especially when your kid is, 4, 5, 6 months old and it's all the time.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Turning towards the book, still in the speed round though, peaches or pawpaws, which make better questions?
I love that. So for folks who have not yet read the book, you're referencing a framework for questions that I introduce early on. Because when we talk about questions, right, it's you can think about any sort of question in your life. And it's a little bit overwhelming to think about what are the types of questions that we're talking about when we talk about falling in love with questions. And so peaches are questions that are kind of answerable on a short-term timeline. So they're kind of the questions that ripen quickly, right, into the fruits of an answer. And that's a question like, will I get the job, right, if you're applying? So you find out pretty quickly, right? A pawpaw question. So pawpaw fruit and pawpaw tree, it takes the tree 5 to 7 years to actually produce the fruit. And so these are questions that are kind of longer timeline. They're answerable eventually, but you don't get to that answer for a longer time. So maybe you're wondering if you're in the right relationship, if this is the right relationship for you. Maybe you're wondering if this is the right career choice for you. You switch to a different job. I think it's hard to say kind of which one I prefer. But I think probably since I'm a human, I prefer the peaches because you get the answer faster. And, I've It's hard. It's hard to exist in uncertainty for longer, right? So,
oh yeah.
So like 7+ years of determining whether or not a co-host on a podcast is a good fit would be a pawpaw question, right?
exactly. It could even be, and this is kind of getting to the other part of the framework, it could even be a Heartwood question. And so Heartwood, those are the questions that, and this is all, based on, as folks can maybe tell, parts of a fruit tree, right? So the Heartwood, these are the questions that stay with us across our lives. Heartwood is the part of the tree. It's at the center. It really gives the tree its security and stability. And the tree never loses or changes that heartwood. It just evolves as the tree grows. So it could be a question that's with you forever.
Yeah, I think it will
but
be.
Kurt, did you hear the stability, the security and stability part?
Okay, which actually leads right into the last of the speed round questions, which is this: do you believe it to be true that questions take a long time to answer can be the most rewarding part of our lives?
I think that is absolutely true. I think, when it comes to things that we find to be most rewarding and meaningful, generally those are the things that take a little effort and take a little time and work, right? So I think the same goes for some of these big, deep questions that can be really hard to carry and hold. But ultimately, when you give them the time to ripen, to kind of open up, or, maybe they're just kind of with you as your companions, that can be the most rewarding, most rewarding parts of your life.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, we got that going for us. So there you go.
We are talking with Elizabeth Weingarten, the author of How to Fall in Love with Questions. And it's, you're amazing. You're part journalist, you're part behavioral scientist, you're part Rilke. I don't want to say enthusiast or fan, but scholar. There's just all kinds of stuff that's packed into this book. And I'm kind of curious about what was the most surprising, so you've got a lot of all this knowledge packaged up in that brain of yours. What was one of the most surprising and amazing discoveries that you made while you were researching the power of falling in love with questions?
It's a great question. And I think, for me, as I was researching this book, and, the intention in this book is really to help folks develop a different and better relationship to uncertainty in their lives. And it came for me out of a period of great uncertainty, which we can talk, more about potentially later on. But I had kind of started in on this journey after I read some of the Rilke that you're referencing. And Rilke states the book that I use as a jumping off point is Letters to a Young Poet. And in this book, Rilke is very famously, he's an Austrian poet from the 1900s. He's writing back and forth to this aspiring poet, Franz Capus. And Capus, he's this 19-year-old kid. And as many of us maybe remember from being 19-year-old, or maybe you're 19 now, you have a lot of questions about life, what you're doing, how to live your life, right? And so Capus is not only asking Rilke how to be a poet, but he's asking him all of these big life questions. And Rilke very famously responds to him by saying, not, answers to his questions, but by telling him, encouraging him to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign tongue. And, I think, so when I read this passage, I was at a point in my life where I hated the questions of my life, frankly. I was questioning. I had recently gotten married. It wasn't working out for various reasons. I had recently left a job to pursue a creative project that also wasn't working out. And I was really struggling kind of under the weight of those questions. And when I read this, I had never felt further from loving the questions of my life. And I'm going to bring it back to what you asked about, this kind of surprising element, because when I read that passage, I was struck by it for many reasons. One, because it felt decidedly different from what I think is a lot of the advice that you see in self-help, pop psychology books, which is, well, you're struggling, just embrace uncertainty, right? It's like, oh, that's all I have to do. Just embrace uncertainty. Oh, well, there you go.
Check.
That's easy enough. Right.
Nailed that.
Nailed easy. And what I love about this is this idea of loving questions. You kind of have to know a little bit more about Rilke to appreciate this, but Rilke, in other parts of Letters to a Young Poet, writes about love as the most difficult thing that we'll ever do in our life. And to love another human is being really the most difficult task we have as people.
He happened to be expert at that, actually, the difficulty.
Yes,
yeah,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think, bringing it back to the surprising part, I was struck by how much I went into this journey thinking loving a question was loving something almost kind of external to me, right? That like my relationship, that uncertainty was this big thing out in the world, this kind of tornado, this scary threat. And I had to love this thing that was external. What I discovered in my quest journey, whatever you want to call it, was that actually loving the questions and loving uncertainty was far more a reflection of my own relationship to myself. And so that to me was really the biggest surprise and biggest kind of insight as I went through this.
We've had a number of guests on who have talked about uncertainty or our cravings for certainty, right? And there's an underlying human desire to have that closure, to get that answer. As you said, I the peaches because I get the answer shorter, right? And I that's what we like. We like to know. We don't like living in that ambiguity of the unknown and various different things. Why, from your perspective, and maybe from the research that you saw, is it why do we have that in the first place? What does it do for us? And then what does that what's the downside of craving that certainty?
Yeah. So the research is pretty clear on this, and we crave certainty in part because our brains are wired to want to use as little energy as possible in any given moment. And this was a really smart adaptation when food was scarce, right? And it was, we wanted to be sure that we were using our energy in the wisest way. But this is what's known as selfish brain theory, right? So it's we're just trying to use as few resources as we can in any given moment, and uncertainty means that we're going to have to use more cognitive resources. It's just more taxing, and so for that reason, uncertainty can feel really aversive. It's this thing that we really just kind of want to get rid of at a biological level. But this is something that really makes us, what I've found, far more vulnerable to what I talk about in the book is just kind of this industry that's been built around providing fast, easy answers to our questions, right? And you have, not only, with the advent of generative AI and obviously Google and just the internet in general, but you have this whole kind of culture now of social media influencers, right? That are serving up these kind of fast, easy answers. And you can think of it as kind of like ultra processed information. Maybe it starts off as being, something real, but then it gets kind of stripped of all of its nutrients, and it's kind of served to you through a vending machine. And there you have it. You have your three ways to, be happy. That's it. And you don't have to really do any other exploration. And so, I think it really makes us vulnerable, this kind of tendency that we have to want certainty, to this entire industry that has been developed around feeding that urge and that desire.
When you were describing it, it reminded me of Twinkies.
Yes.
Like I'm sure that in the manufacturing of Twinkies, there's probably some natural organic foods.
Twinkies probably not the best description there, Tim, because I don't know if that is true. But yes, and maybe Oreo cookies or something like that. There
okay,
you go.
Oreo
Yeah.
cookies. Well, and
Yes.
the interesting thing is that that when it comes to Oreos, like we would sort of naturally reach a capacity of say, I don't need any more Oreos. There'd be some sort of, okay, I've had enough Oreos now. Kurt is our resident Oreo expert.
I don't know if there is a saturation point for me on Oreos. So I'm an outlier though.
For
so
most people. But when it comes to like this craving for certainty, it seems to be unlimited.
Yes, I think that's right. And what I see and what I found from folks that I talk to is that a big part of that is when we are seeking answers, we are not, there are other things that we're seeking that are maybe not fully in our awareness. So I'll give you an example. I spoke to a man who had this experience of kind of information and internet addiction. And he found himself kind of constantly trying to search for answers to questions, just kind of doom scrolling, searching, all of any number of kind of different like internet forums to try to slake an urge for certainty across lots of different domains in his life. Wow. And what he found, and what I've seen from many others too, is it wasn't so much about any single answer for him. And it was much more about feeling really alone and desiring connection. So for him, he was suffering from some depression and from some kind of unresolved trauma from his past. And he thought that answers and certainty could kind of help him feel better in the moment. But in reality, what he actually wanted and what he was actually craving was to feel less alone and to kind of connect to a community, right? Yeah. And I think that for many of us, particularly when we're trying to get answers to questions that are maybe unanswerable or unanswerable on a short timeline, or questions that feel really painful and difficult, the answer is only part of what we're seeking. We're also seeking to just feel less alone and to feel like we're part of a community of people who are, experiencing similar uncertainty in their lives.
I think that's really interesting, and we've talked to a couple people about conspiracy theorists and the groups around there, and again, some of that is the same type of message that they're talking about, right? We have this answer, and because of that, we are connected, and that connection is the most important part. And the answer actually shifts and changes oftentimes in those, but it's the connection part that I think is really interesting. In the book, you argue, at least I believe you argue, that questioning is a skill that can be cultivated. So what is it that we can do to cultivate those, and what are the common barriers that might prevent people from asking better questions?
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that I encourage folks to do, particularly if you are feeling like you're kind of stuck in uncertainty in your life, maybe there's a question that's hanging over you. I created a questions map in the book, and the intention is to help folks build great. You've got it right there. It's kind of part art, part science, and the intention is to help folks create a questions practice. And the easiest way to think about a questions practice is, well, it's kind of whatever you want it to be, right? I'm not going to sit here and say, this is exactly what it is, and here's the answer, right?
There's not like a 3-step process.
Right. Exactly. Right. I am, I'm not going to tell you what it is for you, but I can share a little bit of guidance, right? If you're like, what the heck is this? What do I do? And the basic idea is, there are lots of things in life that we have to practice or we want to practice, meditation, right? Yoga. The idea is it's something that you come back to again and again. And it's not just about the thing itself, right? For yoga or meditation, it's not about necessarily always about the poses itself or about the getting, perfectly, in tune with your mind or the present. It's more about some of the other benefits that you might get from the practice. And with a questions practice, I think one of the most important parts is to use it as a way to first and foremost get a little bit of awareness around why are you feeling fearful or anxious or uncomfortable in the first place, right? Because I think that sometimes, and this is kind of maybe the first step of cultivating that skill of questioning, sometimes we're not even aware of the questions that are maybe, running our lives at the moment, right? All we know is we feel really anxious. And we don't even know why. And I had this experience recently myself. And this, again, just because you write a book doesn't mean that you are all of a sudden an expert or perfect at something, right?
No, you are. You are.
Yeah, right. I know
Totally
everything now.
Yes.
I had this realization as I was preparing to do conversations like this one, right? After you write a book, you have to. You have this great opportunity to talk to folks about the book. But for me, I was starting to get really nervous about it. And I realized, I was kind of like, why am I so anxious about this? And I realized that part of it was because I was trying to kind of answer this question subconsciously of like, how do I be perfect at this, right? And this is another theme in the book, kind of perfectionism and I'm a recovering perfectionist. And this question of like, well, how do I do this perfectly? Was making me really stressed out. And I reflected on it and I was like, this is interesting. This is pretty par for the course for me. I do this in a lot of areas of my life. But what I did through this kind of questions map, which is really a series of prompts to help you get curious about the questions that you have, kind of take action a little bit on what you might want to learn or find out about this question. But fundamentally, a big part of the questions practice and the questions map is trying to understand, is this the right question? Do I want to be asking a different question? Is this a question that's kind of opening up possibilities for me, making me feel better? Or is it a question that's making me feel really constrained and stressed out and like I have to go in one direction? And so for me, that really wasn't the right question. And so I started to ask myself, what's a different question? And the question that I've been asking instead is, how do I enjoy and learn from this time period that I'm in? What would that look like? And so, I think those are some of the ways that, I think I've thought about cultivating that skill of questions and that I try to provide some of these kind of practical prompts and tools in the book for being able to do that.
So the questions, to a certain degree, from the description that you just said and kind of in the book too, it's almost a mindset perspective when you think about like the questions we're asking are setting our mindset to focus in on that. Am I oversimplifying that to a certain degree?
No, I think that's right. I think it is a different mindset. It's a different way of approaching the uncomfortable feelings that you're facing. And I think a big part of it, and I talk in the book about kind of the core elements of a questions practice, and the kind of first one being curiosity, and being able to approach your questions, especially the painful ones, with curiosity and how you start to do that. But it's also about conversation, community, and commitment. So those are the other key elements of a questions practice. But indeed, I think there is a mindset shift that happens in that time period of, in between. I feel this discomfort because I'm not certain, and then that rush to kind of seizing and freezing on a fast, easy answer, right? And one thing I'll bring up from the research is there's a researcher, Ari Kruglansky, who came up with this concept called the need for closure, right? And the need for closure is essentially how comfortable are you in that space of uncertainty and ambiguity? How much do you feel like you need answers, and how fast do you feel like you need those answers? And so I think that it's that mindset shift that kind of happens in that space in between the discomfort and the kind of, I need an answer and I'm just going to seize and freeze on this one that I found.
Hey,
This is Kurt, and we want to say thanks for listening to Behavioral Grooves. And we hope that you're enjoying this episode, but it feels a little bit one-sided. You're hearing from us, but we're not hearing from you.
This is Tim, and we have 2 suggestions to remedy that. The first is join our Facebook page and engage with us.
We want to talk with you. We want to hear your perspectives, and hopefully our Facebook page might be the place to have some of that interaction. So please come and join us.
The other recommendation we have for you is to leave us a quick rating. You know, the little 5-star thing at the bottom of your app? Or a short review. Just leave us a few words about what you like about Behavioral Grooves. We'd very much appreciate it.
Thanks, and we now return you to our regularly scheduled programming.
So glad you brought up Ari Kuglansky. We're huge fans of his work, and he was a fantastic guest also. We'll have, I'm just going to plug a link in the show notes because we want to encourage listeners to go back and check that out. You brought up the questions practice, and can we dive just a little deeper on that? Because this is a really central part of the story here and sort of the magic sauce, or a part of the magic sauce, I think, that kind of makes this whole thing. First of all, why should we consider a questions practice? What's the big benefit to it?
So I think the big benefit is that let me go back actually for a second, because I think part of the benefit is first kind of defining what it means, what uncertainty actually is. And maybe I should have started with this, but we got there eventually. Because uncertainty can mean something different for everyone, right? But the definition that I found that I really liked the most came from a couple of psychologists writing a paper about how decision makers make decisions in times of uncertainty. And the definition there is a sense of doubt that blocks or delays action. And I think this is important because the reason that I wanted to create tools for a questions practice is because I think uncertainty often makes us feel stuck. And the idea being that if we don't have all the answers, we can't move forward. We can't do anything. And that feeling of stuckness is really uncomfortable. And so the idea with a questions practice is when you gain some awareness of a question that is on your mind, you can move forward with it without feeling like you have the answers yet, but you can kind of move forward in a way that helps you get clarity versus answers. And the way I would distinguish that, and kind of you can see on the map too, sometimes you might go through the prompts and you might discover an answer to your question, but other times you might discover, well, I wasn't actually asking the right question. And here's a different question that I should be asking. Or maybe you discover, you know what? I don't like this question anymore. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to drop it. And this is the kind of final part of that tree framework that we brought up earlier, the dead leaves, right? So sometimes questions are not meant to hold on to and love. Sometimes questions are meant to just kind of drop like dead leaves from a tree and we just release them, right? And so I think the idea is, how can you move through the uncertainty in a way that helps you get clarity, not necessarily answers, but, helps you feel like you can, take that feeling of stuckness and get out of it.
I love the differentiation between clarity and answers, because it makes so much sense. And again, if you're thinking about the questions that you're asking yourself, and are they the right questions, there's clarity as opposed to an answer, and even if there is an answer, does it provide clarity for the other parts of your life that you're trying to go with? One of the things I think that you brought up in the book that I thought was really interesting was just our again, uncertainty, living with uncertainty, but the patience that we have or don't have, right? Can you tell us a bit about the relationship between patience and asking questions?
Absolutely. So this was one of my favorite parts of writing this book, was getting to know patience researcher, Professor Sarah Schnitker, and she's at Baylor University. And I'll tell you a little bit about Sarah's story, because I think it's really kind of informative for how we think about that connection between patients and questions. So Sarah Schnittger, back in 2007, she was a PhD student, and she had just started to study the virtue of patience, which she had found was kind of understudied in the psychology literature, and she was, really interested in it. She had just published research that was. She had just published this kind of foundational research on patients, and her career trajectory looked like it was really, really promising. But it was around that time that Schnittger started vomiting uncontrollably, and at different times of day and night. She couldn't control it, couldn't predict it, and it was incredibly debilitating. What it meant was that she had this schedule for her research, and found that she was kind of losing weeks and months from her timeline. Obviously, as a PhD student, that's really tough. And she, at a certain point, she didn't feel safe driving anymore because she had gotten into kind of car accidents because she was throwing up while she was driving. She had to move in with friends. It was just this really, really debilitating situation. And, ever the researcher, she started to get curious about how patience was impacting her pursuit of this goal of her research and finishing her dissertation. And she started to kind of hypothesize that being able to cultivate patience in this time of great uncertainty might actually help, not hurt, in terms of her ability to stay the course and really pursue this goal. And so she ended up doing a lot of research into into the connection between patience, cultivating patience, and goal pursuit. And pursuing goals might sound different than asking questions, but in many ways, it's a similar thing when we think about these long-term questions, right? That we have a long-term question, and the kind of goal of maybe getting clarity or an answer is not unlike another like kind of project that we might have, or another aspiration that we might have in our lives. And so the idea being that it takes it takes patience and kind of the cultivation of patience in our lives to be able to kind of endure and sit with a question that might have a longer time horizon. But the idea behind cultivating patience is that it helps us to kind of live better during that time of uncertainty, and to kind of bear the challenge of that time with kind of some of these kind of the tools that Schnittger lays out in her research.
Well, and to some degree, Elizabeth, it kind of feels like all of these questions are like paths that can lead us to understanding who we are, to sort of a know thyself kind of a position. Is that a fair way of thinking about it?
I think that's exactly right. And I found really clearly that questions and this kind of questions practice are kind of like an internal GPS. So, you can think of these questions as really leading you back to these foundational questions of kind of who am I? What do I actually want? What do I need? And that's why kind of bringing it back to something we were talking about earlier, our relationship to uncertainty is really our relationship to ourselves. And so, when you have a deeper relationship and more awareness of these questions that you're asking and the questions that you want to be asking, ultimately what you're doing is you're forming a closer relationship with yourself, and you're getting, you're more patiently pursuing that relationship with yourself. I think and that's hard, right? Because I think we all feel like, well, shouldn't I just know myself already? Why does it take me so long to get there? But I think it's all connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should. And I think it's funny that we have so many of these shoulds in our lives that really kind of don't really hold up.
Yes.
But we should know ourselves is a really common misconception because knowing yourself is really hard.
It is.
Just
So,
in short.
Sarah, I mean, Tim talked at the beginning of the episode, kind of your background and bringing in these different aspects and various different pieces. But we're focusing on behavioral science. So, from your perspective, what is the connectivity with that connective tissue between behavioral science and falling in love with questions? I mean, is there research that says this is really good? What's that connectivity there?
What's the connectivity there? So I think what I've tried to do with this book is bring in research from a lot of different areas to inquire about this kind of central question of the book. How do you fall in love with questions? Is it even possible to do
Yeah.
that? Trying to kind of unpack what does that look like across different domains. And I think the short answer to your question is there one piece of research or one body of research that answers this? Not exactly. What I found is that there's a tapestry of research to pull from, including
Oh,
the patient's research that we were talking about, including need for closure, and Ari Kruglansky's research, including the kind of the biological underpinnings of our need and drive for certainty and aversion to uncertainty. And there are other kind of parts of research that I draw from that I can get into a little bit too. One of the things that was really interesting for me in developing the questions map and the questions practice was this idea of mental navigation. And this is based on neurological research showing that we use the same brain regions to navigate both mental space and physical space. And by mental space, I mean kind of the relationships between ideas, memories, thoughts. And I spoke to one researcher who wanted to understand the role that spatial metaphors might play in the self-discovery process. So he looked at how much people use spatial language across therapeutic conversations, podcast recordings, and movie dialogue, and found, a significant increase of the use of spatial metaphors in therapy sessions, suggesting that, the process of mental navigation is critical to therapy and critical to understanding kind of how that process of introspection can help support us. And so to me, that was a really interesting connection into, if we're looking for that ability to navigate space, in both contexts, why not kind of create a map to help us kind of navigate both mentally and kind of physically in a way, the uncertainty in our lives, but kind of making that connection more explicit. But all of this is to say, I think there are pockets of research kind of across the behavioral sciences that help us understand kind of the answer to that question. But a big part of why I drew on stories, kind of journalistic stories, and also the stories of Rilke, and kind of brought in, there's a whole section of the book on Zen koans and kind of Zen practice, is because I think, we have to have humility as in the applied behavioral science world that not everything can be answered through scientific research. And sometimes, it helps to have kind of a tapestry of different ways of knowing and different kind of forms of knowledge to help us get at such a big question and such a big topic.
That was beautifully said, Elizabeth. Thank you. And the book resonates with us because we talk a lot about finding your groove. We think that the idea of finding your groove is not a 3-step, process. That it's actually a little bit more complex than that.
Yes.
That it might
Yes.
take a variety of different things, kind of compiling together. This amalgam is kind of where we think that we do get to find our groove and live in our groove and stay in our groove. And I'm curious what you think. What is it in your life that helps you find your groove?
Mm, I love that question. I think, and this goes back to one of the lessons from the book as well, but it's really the people in my life. I think well, maybe it's a combination of things, but that is the strongest influence on my ability to feel like I'm in the groove or not.
Wow.
I would
Hence you wrote a lot about relationships, your own
yes,
personal relationships in the book. So,
yes,
yeah.
exactly. And I think it's, acknowledging that, yes, your relationship to yourself is fundamental. And there are things that I do to try to strengthen my relationship with myself. I think as a writer, writing is essential for me to be able to process what I'm thinking and feeling. And so that, that's probably kind of step one is always, the creative process is for me a big part of finding my groove and understanding what am I thinking at any given moment and
Yeah.
why and what does it mean.
Yeah.
Um, and then physical movement is a really big part of it for me too. Feeling good in my body, but really, without the most important relationships in my life, a lot of that isn't. It would have far less meaning, and so it's hard to separate relationships from those aspects too. But I would say, kind of the creative piece, the movement and relationships. Those are the three things that really help me find my groove, and perhaps not surprisingly, those are also three things that can really help us in times of uncertainty, right? Because I almost feel like finding your groove is a way of talking about feeling, are you feeling good? Are you feeling sure enough to move forward? Are you feeling kind of at peace? Or are you feeling anxious and uncertain, right? So I don't know. I'm seeing uncertainty everywhere these days, but that's
Elizabeth, it's really interesting you talked about the relationships as part of that groove, and it just brought to mind for me this aspect of I have to travel oftentimes for work, and I go to some really cool places, and yet there's a missing piece of that if I don't have my loved ones there. It's like, yeah, I can admire the beauty and be enthralled by whatever the place is, but without having that person to share it with, it lacks some of that groove aspect for me. That being like, yeah, this is the moment I just want to stay in. It's like, no, I want this moment, but I want to bring this other person into this moment because that would make it that much better.
I completely agree with that. And I've had that revelation on trips too, where I'm like, everything is, and it's those moments too. And I think especially now that life has become a little bit more chaotic as a parent, where it's like everything is perfectly controlled. I've done my morning workout. I have this coffee, like everything is as I would like it to be. And yet there's something a little empty about that. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, maybe the equivalent, if we're talking about music, is like kind of the jazz that we all need,
Ooh.
to appreciate our lives versus like uh, the song that's a little bit less improvised. But I feel the exact same way, and I think it's so crucial to kind of recognize that, particularly in the moments where you're like, oh man, this person is driving me crazy, right? It's like,
Yeah.
that's part of it, that's
part of the overall.
groove.
That's part of the overall piece. Yeah.
Yeah.
What a great segue to get to our discussion about music. And by the way, I love the metaphor, love jazz and improvisation as a metaphor for life. Just absolutely adore that. Elizabeth, let's imagine that you were on a desert island, stranded for a year, and you can only take two musical artists with you. You get to take their whole catalog. It's not just one song. Which two will you bring with you?
So, um, this is a really hard question because I kind of know, well,
You don't like music at all, and you could never
no,
even
no, no.
imagine
I
that.
hate music. I think it's just noise.
Yeah.
No. I can tell you, I know, like, definitely the first one. I'm struggling through this. So the first one is Steely Dan. I love Steely Dan. I grew up listening to Steely Dan with my dad, and going to Steely Dan concerts, and just kind of, so Steely Dan reminds me of my dad, and I love that music.
I love your dad right now. I'm just going to say that.
I was going to say, you've just made you were already really high on Tim's list. You just went through the stratosphere. You're the first person to mention Steely Dan for this answer.
That's great. Oh man, reeling in the years. What a jam. I mean, come on.
Totally.
And then I'll say a more recent one, because you've got to keep it current, I guess. Chapel Roan. I really have been enjoying Chapel Roan, and I will say part of the reason that I love Chapel Roan is because she has a line in one of her songs about a date that she's on with a guy who doesn't ask her a single question. And that's the whole origin of my kind of interest in questions, was going on dates with guys who never ask me a single question. And so I really love that. And she's a fantastic artist. So,
oh my gosh, that is so fun.
I just love it. That feels all too familiar too. The being out and not ever being asked a question.
Yes.
Oh, just kills me. Okay.
Yes.
Elizabeth Weingarten, thank you so much for being a guest on Behavioral Grooves today.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Elizabeth, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our questionable brains.
Well, we are questionable. Yeah,
well, I was going to go with uncertain, and then I was going to go, no, your brain, my brain, they're questionable. Like, if we even have them. I mean, I know we're talking and we're breathing, so we do have to, but maybe that higher reasoning part of ours is gone already. Who knows? Because, man, sometimes I really question if I have a really good working brain.
So you do follow the questions, even whether or not you have a brain.
There you go. See, you still, your brain, it might be horrible, but you still question. You still have questions. All right, Tim.
Yeah,
all right. True. What do you want to groove on with Elizabeth here?
Well, I'm fascinated by so much. First, I love Rilke. I started reading Rilke when I was in high school. And
okay, all right. We got to just stop there. Who starts reading Rilke in high school? All right.
I did. I don't know. Maybe I'm an N of 1, but I doubt it. I'm sure. I
doubt if you're an N of 1, but you are in a very small subset of people. I mean, I think Rilke I've heard of Rilke. I think I might have read Rilke once or twice in like a quote somewhere. But, this is why I like hanging out with you.
Because I'm so weird.
You're nerdy in that way. You're nerdy in that good way of liking Rilke from being in high school. That's cool.
Rilke serves like a part of the artist's lexicon, like Diary of an Artist as a Young Man, from James Joyce. Like these are really cornerstone works, I think, for people who have an artistic bent. And so I would just put it in there. But to get back to your question, like, so because she talked about this idea that sometimes we don't need answers, we need clarity.
Yep.
And like, this is a really, really cool idea. And I think it's a novel idea. And I just wanted to see if we could explore this a bit. And I wanted to start with the biological and even cultural needs for certainty, right?
Yeah.
And as a guy who's lived in a pretty uncertain world for the past 3 years, I am relating to this very highly. But I want to start with just reinforcing this idea that our brains, we're cognitive misers. We have this selfish brain, conservative brain. Certainty is just easier for us to process than uncertainty.
Yes.
Right? So there's a good reason for us to have that inclination. So I just want to start by saying, I don't want to shame anybody. It's okay to crave certainty. It's natural.
Well, uncertainty. I mean, okay, let's get into the neurological stuff. So I've done a lot of work on this with organizations, working with them, in moving through uncertainty, chaotic times, various different things. So have looked at the literature, and the literature talks about, our brain responds to uncertainty by activating the amygdala, right? And
Yeah.
so it is the amygdala is the 5F now, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and fester, right? Those
Yeah,
are,
yeah,
yes.
good job. Yes.
Yes, I'm loving that part that we learned.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's that part. And so yes, we are definitely, uncertainty sort of hurts. It makes it's that piece because it activates that part of our brain. And so, it's hard.
Yeah, and that's okay, right? When we're trying to figure things out, we know how it kind of hurts. Like when you're solving math problems for the first time, like that feeling, right? Of it literally kind of hurts your brain. Like you're trying to solve for something,
I
and
thought math just hurt regardless of whether or not it was first time or last time. Math is painful.
no, I think that that's pretty natural for everybody. Well, maybe
Right.
not. I don't know, but
No, I don't think so. I think some people really enjoy math, but
they do. That's
yeah,
true.
they're like you and Rilke. There you go.
That could be the case. So, but I think that also gets to this idea that we have trouble dealing with the cognitive dissonance of that uncertainty, right? And
Yes.
we know from psychology that holding these two things in opposition in our brain is really challenging,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've personally I've wrestled with questions of faith for 20 years, and it's not just all yes or all no kind of thing. I still like delving into the question, in part because it doesn't impact whether or not I'm going to eat or sleep or earn money, but it does. It is a question that I think that is good to keep as a question, not as I have the answer.
Right. And we'll get to that part, right? So, and then I also think, and Elizabeth talked about this, right? There are cultural pressures and this idea of getting instant answers, as we talked about it's like Google, AI, social media. It's all right there, right now at your fingertips. How many times have you recently, like you're at dinner and you have a question and, oh, well, we'll pull out the phone and we'll get the answer right now.
Oh
And that's what we
God,
do because it's
too many
there.
times. Yeah.
Instead of sitting there with the question, instead of sitting there thinking about, oh, who was that, that means from simple questions of who was that simple, or who was the player that was on the Timberwolves, last year that I can't remember his name, versus, and to, what's the answer to, the eternal question of, does God exist? Right. There you go. And we can Google both of those.
You can, right. But is it really, I guess a question that I have is how satisfying is it just to always just be able to Google the answer? In some ways, it's like, oh, check that off the list. But did we really learn anything? Did we actually, are we better? Like to get back to Elizabeth's question about do we have a better relationship with ourselves by just coming up with that super quick answer? I'm not so sure.
Well, it's right. Sometimes you don't need the answers. You just need clarity. That was the part that I think is really keen on this.
Yeah.
The idea that answers aren't necessarily, as you said, satisfying sometimes. Sometimes the piece is just sitting with the question and clarifying, is this really the question that I'm answering? Why am I asking this question? What will I get when I get the answer? What will be the way that I am in the world now because of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a deeper reflection.
It is. I wanted to ask you in this idea of applying this stuff into work. You do a lot of work with leaders in big corporations. You work a lot with leadership. Where do you think uncertainty fits in the leadership lexicon?
That's a great one, because I think there's a range, as in anything, right? There you get leaders who are fine living in this uncertainty and can deal with it, and very, very good. And then there's others who the slightest part of uncertainty, I think, drives them crazy. And I think generally organizations prefer more certainty than less, right? I mean, that's just a natural thing, particularly if you're trying to, invest money in the future, and am I going to invest it in X or in Y? And if I'm more certain that X is going to do good, well, all right, that helps me make those decisions. But I think there's a bigger piece of this, which is the idea of leadership and uncertainty in kind of how they're dealing with their people, right? Or how their teams or their employees are working when it's an uncertain world. And particularly today, given all of the changes, I'm doing a workshop in a couple weeks about how to deal with change. And, this idea of being able to sit with it, like Elizabeth is saying, right? This idea of making sure we get the right questions is really key on that. But also, we have a normal response to this and various different pieces. But yeah, I mean, it's all over the board.
Do you think that there are certain corporate cultures that respond to this idea of not knowing yet, kind of thing? Is that something that works for some cultures but simply doesn't for others?
Oh, that's a good question. And I haven't really thought about it from that perspective, from a organizational culture perspective. I can tell you there are individual leaders, and those leaders instill that type of culture within their teams.
Yeah.
So there is individual differences from what I've seen. So yes, there are some leaders who we don't know yet is absolutely fine. They're perfectly willing to explore, figure things out as we're moving forward, and be Bainesian in kind of looking at, all right, we have some more information now. Now we'll readjust where I am, what we're thinking. And maybe it's still not enough to change the trajectory that we're on, but maybe with the next piece of information that might, switch the course, or it might reassure us that we're going actually on the right course. And so they're okay with that. And this idea that they're moving through these projects or these, the world in general in a way that, yeah, I'm going to figure it out. I don't know when, but we'll get there.
Leaders could really improve psychological safety by allowing for this, we're working on the right direction, or we're not sure yet, kind of thing. And I would really love to see more leaders in companies be willing to embrace that, to build curiosity in their teams.
Yeah. We had talked about this at one point, I think, about using just the words that leaders use and spatial metaphors, right? So this idea of finding direction, moving forward, that being encompassing, the space that you are in, and using that forward motion, the finding direction piece. Those are ways that, again, just kind of make it so our brains are better able to accept the uncertainty.
Yeah, I love that. Let's loop back to clarity over answers. Right?
Okay.
So, because there's just a couple of things that come to mind, and the first one was that answers, if we get them too early, could actually just be premature or incomplete.
Right.
Right. The whole Einstein thing of, I'm going to spend 55 minutes on the question and then 5 minutes on the solution. Like
it's key. I used to have this little handwritten note, and I'm going to not be able to quote it exactly, but it was on my mirror for 20 years plus. So I should be able to remember it, right? But, it was something along the lines of, it's not about the getting the right answers. It's about getting the right questions.
Yeah.
And I had that,
Right.
right? And I would much prefer to have the right question, even if I don't have the right answer, than to get the right answer to the wrong question.
We struggle with this with clients. I know that we have been in meetings. I think specifically of some specific meetings we've been in with clients where the client says, all I want is my people to do this. Just figure out how to get that done. And it's going to be, and the leader has already decided this is going to be fill in the blank, an incentive problem. That it's an incentive solution or something.
It's a technological solution. We need to get this new program. You need to just do a training program to get my people, as opposed to, no, we have to get the people to want to use this new technology. There needs to be a larger, question about what is the end result that you're trying to get. And that's oftentimes, again, we lock in on the first solution or the first idea that pops in our head. As we know, that's usually not the right one. So
that's right. Statistically,
at least for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Slower now could equate to going faster later.
I love it. It. Yeah.
Yeah. That's and just lastly, I just got to say, I just think that connecting to Rilke, connecting to artists, they have uncommon and valuable insights. I know you're laughing, but this is like
you're just like, yeah, I'm talking about me and I'm being the artist, and we have uncommon insights. I love it.
Well, I don't know about me, but I don't even know if I'm an artist, but I do know that the really great writers, really great artists, they ask good questions.
That's true. Yeah.
And they have insights that are uncommon. Picasso asked really good questions. Why does a bull need to look like this? Why does a face need to look like this?
Well, and we've all met those people, right? That are in that meeting, in the conversation that we're having, who are able to have that question that you're going, I didn't even think about that question. And it's like, man, like I wish I had that skill set. Being a podcaster too, it'd be really great if I had that, and being able to ask questions to our guests. But
get the Golden Question Award. Yeah,
the Golden Question Award. Well, all right, we're not going to get the Golden Question Award. At least I'm not. So I think, are we done? Do we need any other areas we need to talk about?
I don't think there's anything else we really need to cover, but I do want to reiterate gratitude to the FeedSpot folks for putting Behavior Grooves not just in the top list, but number 2 in behavioral. We're number 2.
We're number 2.
I know.
We came in second. Yes. Woo. Who wants to be first? Come on. I mean, that's a good question. Who wants to really be first?
Totally overrated.
Like to be like the you don't have all the pressure then, right? Yeah. All right. No, in all honesty, we are very appreciative. Thank you to the FeedSpot folks. And by the way, next week we'll be exploring the super cool idea of changing your personality. Now, that's a really big question.
Whoa. Can you change your personality?
Can I change my personality, or do I want to change my personality? I mean, do I like who I am as the way I am, or would I rather be a little bit more, outgoing, a little bit more extrovert, or would I rather be a little more conscientious, right? So, and we're going to be doing that with a researcher and journalist who tried. And
wow.
I don't know. Did they succeed? Maybe they did, but they tried to do just that, change their personality.
But maybe. Because they wrestled with the question. They started with.
They wrestled with the question.
All right. Well, this should be a good conversation with Olga Kazan. We just want to encourage folks to listen next week for that. And we encourage you this week to use some of Elizabeth's great reminders to keep these questions going and use them as you go out to find your groove.